Hello, everyone, and welcome to Accessibility News. I'm Glen Ingram, along with Tracey Delisle. Today, we're going to talk about issues with people with mobility and how that affects different parts of the business, whether it be, again, physical or online. We always want to make sure we explore both of those. Why don't we tell tell everyone out there, Tracey, a little bit about why they're listening to us and our experience. Would you like to go first?
Sure. Well, we are a company that go out and we do, physical inspections of businesses to help increase mobility for the disabled, and that's for all different types of disabilities. And part of the reason that we're doing this is because we want to bring awareness to businesses and people about the things that people are doing to help increase the mobility and to get some awareness of why some of these laws are in place. Everyone, hears ADA and they want to run, but when they really look at the law and why it was put in place, you'd realize it's not so bad. It's just that people abuse it, and so we want to kind of turn that information around so that people understand why and not be so afraid of it, so that we can increase the mobility. We're all getting older. When we talk about mobility, we're all going to get there someday. So we might as well take a look at that and say, what would we want? Mm-hmm. That's a little bit kind of about what we're doing, and just bringing some awareness, some fun awareness, not always the doom and gloom of accessibility, like the fun stuff too.
Agreed. And again, my name is Glen Ingram again. I'm a certified accessibility specialist. I work for one of the few companies in the world that truly builds websites that are accessible. And we just want to try and, again, educate John Q. business owner, Louis the plumber, if you will, what you need to do, not only to protect yourself from these lawsuits, that's what people always want to talk about, but to increase your exposure, increase the potential for everyone to be able to become a client, because that's what we're in business for. Everyone wants to have more customers, more clients, more exposure. So by making sure that your website works for everyone, regardless of ability or disability, you have potential to grow your business better. So let's talk a little bit about mobility issues. And this is going to apply more to the physical side than the website, but we will talk about some of the crossovers that we're seeing here in the recent past. So what are some of the most common things that you see as far as mobility issues with physical businesses, Tracey?
Path of travel. They don't keep the space open wide enough for walkers, canes, people that are maybe shuffling their feet, that they can't, turn sideways to get in between some chairs. So path of travel is definitely the number one mobility issue that we see. And if you talk to someone who has a mobility issue, they're going to tell you the same thing. Getting around. I don't want to have to ask for help. I don't want to have to, be their big eyes and saying, somebody's got to get that out of the way so I can get through. So for safety and for convenience and for enjoyment of that establishment, path of travel, keeping the space available for them is definitely the biggest.
Do you see it's really something that from top to bottom, everyone has to be trained in and understand? Because I could see that you could have someone come in and clean a restaurant, a bar after hours and something like this. They move things around to clean a floor. And then if they don't know how to reposition things back, today you could be accessible and tomorrow you could not. Do you see that type of thing happening?
All the time. And that's why we offer training and identifying some of the problems that come up. I often talk to owners and say, listen, it's not as if your staff is doing this on purpose. They're trying to appease a large audience. But when in doing that, it's easy to get into a place where they put a bunch of tables together or turn them in an angle, and now they can't get through it all. And a lot of times people will measure from a table to a table, not realizing you got to do from the chair. So keeping that space open when you clean, training your employees to put things back, so important. And I tell them to, cut a stick and walk through your place. You're going to know. And that's a great training tool. So we've seen right there on site when I've been doing training, you'll see an owner like cut a piece of a broom off and like, here's your new tool. So.
Well, and you mentioned from the chair, is there a rule of thumb as far as how far the chair is going to be slid out away from the table to allow for someone to sit in there to make sure that you still have enough room for the path of travel?
Right. So there's so many different styles of chairs. So you want to make sure that you've got, in some areas it's going to be 36-inch aisle, in some areas, types of business, it's going to be 44. That's why it's so important to touch base with a CAASP or someone who truly knows your type of business, so that they can say, is this an access style for, grocery store? Is it a restaurant? What type of establishment is it, so that you can identify what the actual width is for the path within your establishment. So yeah, and it's different for all. I mean, hotels, there's different areas within an establishment that have different measurements.
Now, let me ask you this question, just because someone asked it to me here in about a month or so ago. When you go to, let's say, an office building, and it has 2 levels, and let's say the elevator is under repair, what protection do they have, or what happens if someone comes to that office building? Let's say it's a two-floor outdoor office building, and the only access they have to the second floor is up the stairs.
Right. So at that point, the property manager needs to make sure that if someone's coming to visit one of their tenants, that they've made some sort of reasonable accommodation. That reasonable accommodation can be that if they're going to see, let's say, their tax accountant, that tax accountant can come down and maybe help them in another area, or wait and say, listen, our elevator is broken. I can meet you on site. So you just want to make a reasonable accommodation. They're still liable to a lawsuit, because in California you can sue for almost anything. But if the regular average person who has a disability sees that, and they call and say, hey, I can't get upstairs, you, as somebody that's wanting their business, you need to make a reasonable accommodation, or reschedule for when that elevator is operable again. Because if it's just a temporary down, it's not something that's going to be a permanent. I mean, things break. People understand that. I think if it came up in a lawsuit, they'd be able to show that it broke, they had a work order, it was getting done, and that they made the communication to the tenant, and the tenant then had to communicate that to their guests.
Okay. Are you seeing any new trends with regards to mobility issues and lawsuits with regards to physical accessibility?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing a lot of new names of people that are suing. Usually it's the same old people, but I would say since the pandemic, we're seeing a lot of new names, and they are a little more aggressive in their findings. They're looking at those physical items that they can easily see through pictures and things like that, which was normal, but I'm seeing more of them. I would say that is the trend, is that we're seeing more and new names. So but we're also seeing a trend of people calling and saying, hey, we're putting our business back together. What should we do? Because we want to do it right this time. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, in kind of from a negative places, maybe some of these lawsuits have helped. People say, hey, I don't want to get sued. And so now they're paying more attention. That's not a great way to learn. And I look forward to getting back into the more educational portion of what we do, to teach them why. Not just because you don't want to get sued, but because you want to increase the mobility of the disabled within your business.
I have heard, and I was waiting to ask you about this. I remember in the past we've spoken about Google Earth and looking at like painting and stripes and stuff like that. I was just on a call last night, and I heard from another business owner that they're hearing about people using Google Earth for outdoor dining, different access, more of being able to identify potential obstacles outside leading into the business other than just parking stripes. Have you heard much about that?
Yeah, they're actually including cities now. So if they see something within a government sidewalk, we're now seeing that they're adding that. And yeah, there's a lot of outside areas that you may be responsible for that you didn't realize. Again, that's going to be the importance of identifying if that violation actually is yours. Some people say, well, that's the city sidewalk. Yeah, but you might be liable for having some of that repaired. There's all these little quirky laws within different jurisdictions that we do see that. So you definitely want to be aware. And with the outdoor dining, we're getting more and more calls of people saying, hey, listen, we just kind of threw this together during the pandemic, but now that we're going to have the ability to keep it open, which is great, summer months, let's do the best we can to increase their money. They're saying, okay, what do we need to do to make it accessible? Because now that we can take a breath, we want to make it accessible for all. So those are some trends we're seeing that we had never seen before.
I know before you mentioned those little bumpy dots, like right there maybe at a corner or whatever with a sidewalk and stuff like that. How do those apply to someone with a mobility issue, maybe they're in a wheelchair or anything like that, to help them have better mobility? Yep,
those are actually called truncated domes. I personally call them ankle breakers. If you've ever been in heels, I don't think you have, Glenn, but maybe.
That's a subject for a different day.
I'm sure at some point I'm going to break my ankles on them. But mobility issues. So, if somebody's blind, they are going to use the cane. But I will tell you that somebody in a walker, we need to avoid those, because if they're the scooters, like they're shuffling the feet, that actually becomes a risk hazard for them. So we actually try to avoid those. The other thing that I learned and had not thought about is, there is specific space in between those bumps. And there's also little bumps within that when you have the actual compliant ones. And something that I think that we didn't realize is when somebody has like a quadriplegic, when they go over anything bumpy like that, everything is an extreme vibration. So when they go over those bumps and their wheels don't fit within that area that they're supposed to, it's like rattling your brain. Like if you were, rolling around on some crazy ride at the, at the amusement park, but in a bad way. And so although they're very effective for the blind community as far as mobility, it can actually be somewhat of a barrier for them too. So it's a double-edged sword. We certainly don't want the blind walking out into the path of a vehicle way. We don't want anybody getting hit. And we're talking about blind. We're not just talking about totally blind. We're also talking about people that just have vision impaired. So not everything is clear as a bell. So, but on the other hand, there are some risk hazards, and we teach those disabled people to kind of go around those so that they don't fall. And I don't like when you put your cart over it and it's going to break your bottle of wine. That's never good either. So They need to fix. So I avoid them.
So what other things with regards to obstacles for for people with mobility issues, again, whether they be blind, in a wheelchair, in a walker, in a little mobile cart or whatever, do you guys think are things that business owners really need to be cognizant of and aware of?
As far as mobility, I would say that when you have an establishment that has all high counters, and they can't reach something, and they can't stand up or walk around, or you put your pay, rarely anybody uses cash anymore. So you've got those little pay things for your credit cards. Well, they need to be able to see, and if there's a code and things like that. So people with mobility, you got to be able to, make sure what their mobility is at hand. You're going to need, you may need to help them. 2, is it so high that they can't see and put their own code in, and now they're having to give you their code? That's not good, and you don't want to call it out, and all of a sudden now somebody's stealing your credit. So I would say that, people need to be aware and think about those types of disabilities that someone can't stand up. They can't look at it. So where it's located is very important. Anything like that, ATM, anything that you and I need to do to make some sort of purchase or anything like that. The counters, it's really important to make the items that they have on those counters accessible so that they can make the purchase based on their mobility disability.
Let's talk about briefly the crossover that we've had the pleasure of dealing with for the past 60, 90 days. And with some people in wheelchairs that are suing hotels over not knowing exactly how accessible the hotel, the room, the meeting areas are, so that they know if they can book a room.
Yeah, so I am getting a lot of calls that, and you know, I'm no techie, so I send all of these on to you because you are the specialist in this. But what I'm hearing is that they're not describing the type of room that they have. They'll say that they have ADA rooms. Well, that's pretty broad, and there's so many different types. So if they have communication rooms, they're going to need to describe that on their website. They're going to need to, do they have a roll-in shower? Do they have, you know, drop-in tubs? Do they have, there's all these different types of rooms that they have to have. If they just put a blanket ADA on there, or they're using one of those crazy buttons, people assume that you have every type of room. So when they get there or try to book it, and then you're, oh, we don't have that type of room, they're in some trouble. And I think it's interesting that it's just a blanket statement that's been put on the website. So in your side of it, what is it that people, what are you seeing in that side of it for hotels and that they're doing wrong technically on their website that makes it so that it's confusing to people? What is it that's happening that you see?
I see it as being a gray area. I just had an attorney send me over a day or two ago some documentation that he found from the DOJ, because the difficulty that I'm seeing, or the gray area that's going to just allow a lot of these lawsuits to come forth, is enough description. So is it, how far do you have to go? Do you have to have plans for the bathroom? Do you have to show what's going on in there and actual measurements and things like this, as far as knowing what is enough of a description so that someone can book a room? I think until we have some parameters, maybe a lawsuit actually goes and has a judgment and an agreement on this or something like this, we have no case law, we have no precedent yet. And that's the problem. I think it is until then, it's up to your determination. And does your definition or determination agree with my definition or determination? And where do we go from there? So I think this is going to be something that we're going to be dealing with for quite some time. And what my concern is as we're dealing with it, or after we're dealing with it, then what do we go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3? Because as you've seen in the past, once we have something happening in one state, we're going to see that happening in other states where these lawsuits are coming forth. And when we have something going to one industry, now what other types of industries can I take this same lawsuit to? So I see once we have a precedent set for a hotel, now we're going to look at restaurants, we're going to be looking at movie theaters, we may be looking at different types of businesses, doctors' offices, and things like that, because once we have this precedent, it's going to expand against other types of businesses, other geographic locations, and things like this. So I think, as you mentioned before, where we're seeing for the physical and the web, different plaintiffs coming in each month, now this is going to expand the reach of different types of plaintiffs, and more plaintiffs we have working on with more attorneys, the more lawsuits we're going to have. So I think this is going to be something that I remember a law firm out of Chicago, I think it's called Safarth. Before everything happened last year, they projected we were going to have 100,000 lawsuits last year. They projected that for 2021, and I see with this expanded lawsuit, expanded type of litigant, or expanded litigant and type of lawsuits joined together, I think this may be the first year that we see between physical and web over 100,000 businesses sued this year. So it's kind of scary.
Wow, I didn't even realize that the numbers were that high in website. But I guess, you know, across the nation, I'm pretty focused, you know, typically in California. So that's crazy. From the side of not being a lawsuit, if I was, you know, talking for the disabled person, I would say if you're looking at a hotel website, one of the things you're going to want to know is if they have the different types of disabled rooms. For instance, if they have communication rooms, then put that you have communication rooms. And if you have those, it's a double-edged sword. So you're doing it for the right people, so if I'm deaf, obviously I want to know I can go to that hotel and that they're going to have the light features so that if someone rings the doorbell and things like that, that I'm going to know that someone's at my door, that I ordered room service and it's arrived. So, but that also can be, they're going to say, oh, well, you have this type. If it was someone suing, they could say you have this type of room, but you don't have this type of room. So it is a double-edged sword. So you just kind of have to find some balance in that. I wanted to ask a question regarding mobility with websites, because it gets kind of confusing, and I certainly don't know how to answer it to people, is what types of mobility issues is it that people have with websites and searching the website? So I've heard a couple of different, that they have to be able to use just the keyboard or just the mouse. And so how does that tie into what someone's website looks like or is supposed to function? Can you explain some of that?
Sure. So let's talk real quick, just because there's a lot of misnomers. So anyone with a vision issue, like you mentioned, they could be blind, or they could just have severe difficulty seeing. Someone that has MS, MD, cerebral palsy, and they can't navigate a mouse. And then you have some people with cognitive issues. So maybe some type of learning disabilities like ADD, ADHD, and things like that. For people with vision issues and learning disabilities, they are going to use what's called a screen reader, because for someone that can't see, it turns everything on the website audible. And sometimes for people with learning disabilities, it's easier for them to hear than it is to read and comprehend information. Right. Now, for someone that has MS or MD and can't use a mouse, all of these different things I just described is why the website has to be able to be navigated with a keyboard only and no mouse. So basically your tab key turns into your pointer, and your enter or your return key turns into your clicker on your mouse. So you need to be able to operate any original navigations, like those buttons at the top of your page and forms and things like that, with just those two keys. Now, there are some examples of tables and a few different other things, or like if you have a form and it's like where you have to put in your address and you have all 52 states, once you hit the tab key or the enter to click in there, and then you may have to use the up or down arrows to navigate that. But a lot of your website primarily has to be able to be navigated just with the tab and the enters, and then you may have to use arrows from time to time to navigate different functions within there. But at no time do you ever need a mouse to navigate a website to cover these people that have a difficulty either using it, or it's just another obstacle, if you will, that you're going to add to them by requiring them to use a mouse.
Got it. And so every website needs to be programmed in a way that it can function like that.
Yes. And the difficulty for most people to build websites is the people that built screen readers weren't web people. So you have to understand some different types of HTML and actually understand how to code in order to make them work properly, and to understand when and how you need to use what's called ARIA, which is Accessible Rich Internet Access, our application, as far as some of the different parts or components of a website. Sorry, I have a truck backing up here. And there are some times when you're going to use what's called semantic HTML to label different things, because let's say you can't see, and all of a sudden you're navigating a website and you have a link to a Facebook page, maybe a link to something else within there. Well, it needs to be programmed in a way where it'll be audible, say, link to Facebook business page, link to ESPN, link to Orange County Register, so that they can determine, just like you and I can, they can see, do I want to click on that link and follow that path, or do I want to ignore and bypass it and stay on the website? So everything needs to be programmed in a way that, regardless of your ability or disability, we all have the same access to the same information and ability to become a client, to learn more information. Whatever your website is trying to convey or to do, everyone needs to have the same access to it. And so those are the main things for mobility that we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of forms that people don't build right. So we had a gentleman on a podcast here about a year ago that had vision issues. And prior to him losing his vision in his mid-20s, he actually learned programming. So it was kind of interesting seeing the frustration on his face when he's like, come on, don't be lazy. He had just been on some major retailer's website. They did a great job making the website accessible until he tried to purchase something and the form wouldn't work for him. He said, you get me interested. I want to buy from you. I want to conduct commerce. And then you block me at the 13th hour. So he said,
Wow.
we have to make sure that those little things are, because the last thing you want to do as a business owner is to get someone interested in what you're doing, have them want to purchase from you, conduct commerce, book a reservation, whatever. And then now, sorry, you can't work with us.
Right. Glen, you're kind of breaking up in the image here, and you're blurry. So just kind of heads up for you. You were a little bit garbled in there. There we go.
Right. Well, thank you.
Yeah. So, quick question on that is: do we have we talk often about these little buttons that people put on. Is there anything within that button, good, bad, that isn't doing that? Like, there's no conversion within that button that all of a sudden makes it so that you only have to use your keyboard, or am I incorrect?
No, you're 100% right. A lot of the inefficiencies or deficiencies of those plugins, those shortcuts, if your navigation isn't built properly to work with somebody with MS, MD, cerebral palsy, it's not going to magically fix that. If you don't have a link done properly on there, it's not going to change your HTML code on the backside. If you have an alt tag or a description of an image behind you, or for a picture there, it's not going to change that. There may be some that have some AI that would create something out of nothing, but it's not going to override and have a human factor.
Right. So coming from the other side of this, I think the message that I'm hearing is that the button may work for one type of disability, but we have to remember that these laws are accessibility for all. Yeah. And if you're not covering all, then you might as well not have it, because
and they produce other obstacles. So for someone that's using a screen reader, when you have one of those buttons that has their own screen reader in there, if they accidentally hit that button while using their screen reader, it's kind of like hearing music in stereo, but one about 3 seconds behind. So it's very confusing, very frustrating for someone that's trying to listen and hear what's on your website when they're hearing things staggered apart a little bit. And so they provide typically more obstacles than they create solutions. And since they don't technically make your site accessible, what we're starting to see is they are a target on your website, so that people who know how to go out and look for everyone with this solution on their website, guess what? Now when these people are sending out massive letters per month, massive lawsuits, now you have a target on your website. So I wouldn't recommend them.
Yeah, I definitely get those calls of people saying, I bought this thing and now it's not, compliant, and what happened. And I'm always grateful for your knowledge, because sometimes when you start talking about all those acronyms that go with websites, it's like French. So, but I can give you all the ones that have to do with physical architectural barriers. So I am so grateful for your knowledge in that field, because it's so needed.
All right, awesome. Well, we were able to bring on an actual certified CAASP inspector today so that they can answer some questions for us with regards to some of these physical barriers. So let me bring Cory on, Tracey.
All right.
Hello.
Welcome,
hey, Cory. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks. Well, thanks for joining us. Just to kind of give you a heads up, a little bit more of a background, we're talking today about physical barriers for people with mobility issues. So we really want to focus on any things that people are seeing, that if you're in a wheelchair, if you're in a motorized chair, if you're in a walker, if you have a cane, just to kind of give business owners some background, some understanding, so they really know what they need to do to put their best foot forward. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of sharing with some things that you're seeing, maybe newer, maybe some things, whether it be with outdoor or indoor, that business owners should be more aware of with regards to obstacles for people with mobility issues.
Well, I think it depends on the type of business that you have, but across the board, anything in the parking area is going to be a high priority, especially anything that you can visually see that's wrong. So if you're missing signage or have incorrect signage, that's going to be easily identified. If you have accessible parking stalls have really two areas. There's the parking space where the vehicle will park, and then there's the access aisle adjacent to that has the blue border and the hash mark area. That's an area where someone with a van or a wheelchair can easily enter and exit their vehicle. Oftentimes I see built up curb ramps where asphalt is built up within that access aisle, and that parking stall and access aisle can't have a slope greater than 2%. So one, it's more difficult for someone with a disability, and if you are in an area where a plaintiff is either driving by or out targeting businesses, something as visual as that is something that should be taken care of sooner than later.
Cory, is it assumed that the reason that they can't build up that curb is because they're going to exceed that slope that you were talking about? So if they have an average curb, I mean, whatever that might be, 6 inches, 8 inches, whatever the average curb is, and they're going to build up to it, even if they feather it out as long as they can, is it going to be assumed that there's no way that would work? Because I do see that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, 2% is the max in all directions within that, that parking space and access aisle area. If you were to have a curb ramp, it needs to be built into the pedestrian walk. That's directly in front of it. If you didn't want to go the route of a curb ramp, you could always build up the parking style and the parking space and access aisle to the same elevation as the walk in front of it.
Yeah.
And then you'd have a zero curb. So those two methods are good ways to provide an accessible stall on an accessible route. But anytime you see those built up curb ramps, that area inside the access aisle needs to be 2%. And I mean, that's pretty level. If you were to walk on a surface that's 2%, you would assume that that's a level surface. So anything greater than that, especially a ramp, is going to be.
Yeah, 2% isn't much. 2%
Yeah.
isn't much.
Now, Cory brought up something we haven't spoken about since we started doing this, Tracey, and that's signage. And I know signage has been a big deal for years. So could you elaborate a little bit on the proper type of signage and what business owners need to know about something that they may not be able to purchase just off of Amazon and what they should have out there, Cory?
Yeah, so for parking, you want to make sure that you have that the black and white tow-away sign at either each parking lot entrance or the parking stall itself. That basically says you could be towed if you don't have a placard. So that sign is more for people that don't have an accessible placard on their car. And the other one is directly in front of the parking stall. It needs to be, reflective. Needs to have the minimum fine $250 in California. If it's van accessible, it has to state van accessible. So if those signs are missing altogether, then that's an issue. And if they look wrong, they're the wrong color, they're not reflective, that's also something that's easily identified. But as far as signage in California and getting signage from a California vendor, it's important for the tactile braille signs because the California and ADA standards are a bit different. So I find a lot of tactile braille signs that comply with ADA, but not California, and that becomes an issue for any business that's here in California.
Is there an easy way to test to know if my sign is reflective? That seems like is there an easy way to test to determine if my sign is reflective? That seems like it could be a kind of a slippery slope.
Yeah, I mean, if it's nighttime, that's easily done by shining a light on it. But if you get close to it, you can see the little reflective elements inside of it, inside of the material.
It looks sparkly.
If you want to take a step forward, you can take a cell phone camera light and shine it on, and you should be able to see some reflection.
Cool. So, is there anything on there? Again, I see a lot of people. I've been talking to a lot of people in a lot of groups about Amazon stuff. So sorry for keep bringing that up. But and is there a way to know when you're purchasing something, if you're buying something like this from Amazon, what to look for, what not to look for, anything like that? Or are you just kind of rolling the dice?
I would say don't don't do that, especially in California, because a lot of those advertisers will say that it's compliant with ADA and Title 24, and then you receive it, and that's just not the case. And for most people, they would never know that it's not compliant. They can see the raised letters, they can feel the braille, but it's the dimensions are wrong. So I would go with just a local sign vendor, and make sure that they're up to speed on ADA and accessibility, because not all local sign companies are specialized in that. So
Absolutely,
that would be my advice.
I've got a question, Glenn. If you don't, I've just come across this, and it was exciting at the Hotel Delisle in San Diego. Beautiful place, and I noticed that they were rolling out this thing that would be a path from the sidewalk in front of their hotel all the way out to the water. Are there requirements for those, or is it just because they own that beachfront that they have to do it? Or, I saw some people that were pretty excited, and I thought it was a cool thing that they were providing accessibility to some disabled clients to go all the way out towards the water. And how cool is that? So that, can you imagine wheelchairing through the sand? I can't.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen those. They basically roll out. They look like planks of wood that roll in. It's definitely easier for someone in a wheelchair to get out to the beach. I'd say it's important just because for the Hotel Delisle in particular, they're selling the beach. That's why people come, to San Diego and to that hotel in particular. So if you can give access to the experience, I think that's going to be important. There are other methods I've seen they look like oversized wheelchairs with the big plastic wheels that can get through the sand. That's another good alternative. But it's not a constructed element, so it's hard to say that it would be required. But I can definitely see someone filing a claim that says that they didn't have equal access to the beach if it wasn't present. So kind of a gray area.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool, and definitely I know that if I was in a wheelchair and I was going to be going to the beach, I'd be making sure that a hotel that was right there on the beach could get me out to the water. So especially nobody picnics right there unless it's like a 4th of July or something, or a Memorial weekend. Right there next to the sidewalk, everybody wants to be close to the water. So especially if you're like an elder, you don't want to leave grandma by the sidewalk and all the kids are playing near the water. They want to be able to see that. So I thought that was kind of cool that they were already putting that out, anticipating all of the new, openings and people coming back. So liked seeing that. Just didn't know if it was a required thing that they had to do, or it's just a great accommodation and thoughtful of the hotel to do that for their disabled clients.
Well, beyond a requirement, I think it's just good marketing.
Absolutely.
If you were in a wheelchair, having access around the facility is going to be important. Yeah. And if they're showing that they're taking the initiative to provide access to the beach, and you had the option to stay in 2 different resorts in Coronado, but one is providing access to the beach, well, which hotel do you think they're going to book?
Absolutely. Even if it was a little more, I would absolutely go to that one. So it is a great marketing feature. We've talked about this, Glenn, that, whenever people do something like that, they definitely want to market that because they all talk. And if they know that a business is kind of going above and beyond to do that, heck, we want to send them there, and we're talking about it, and they definitely talk about it. So
100%. Each one of these types of disabilities are very close networks, very close, close to people that have those things. So they definitely share that. Now, Cory, you mentioned something about with these signs that have some different rules for California. I recently started working with a restaurant group that has restaurants all over the country. Are there any other common accessibility issues with regards to physical businesses that somebody should know, particularly about California, that may not come into play in Hawaii or Arizona or Nevada or the Midwest or some other state?
Well, restroom signs are different in California. You have 2 sets. So you have the tactile braille sign that goes on the wall right next to the strike side. of the door. And then you have the geometric sign that goes directly on the door. And that's a California standard only. So if it's a men's restroom, it's going to be a contrasting triangle. If it's a women's, it's going to be a contrasting circle. And if it's unisex, it's going to have a circle and a triangle that both contrast with the door and with each shape. So that's a big difference compared to many of the other states.
So basically in other states, they can read one sign to get in, but in California, we need two.
Yeah, it's more for people with low vision to easily identify, where the restroom is. If you have low vision and you could see to the other side of the restaurant, but you couldn't really make out what any of the text said on a sign, but you can identify, a 1 foot circle on a door. You can easily identify, that's where the restroom is. So
right,
that's the intent.
I like it. It's what I look at. I rarely actually look at the side one, circle,
Yep.
triangle. You know what it is.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that. Hold on one second. I just saw someone that posted and I don't have everything connected. So Tracy, ask a question. I'll be right back here.
Yep.
Let me see what someone else is asking.
Cory, one of the things that we are hearing come up a lot is on hotel websites. People are confused about what types of ADA rooms are required. And they're using just the standard, that they have ADA rooms. And one of the reasons it's so confusing is because I said there's different types of ADA. And by just making a blanket statement, you're assuming that they have all of them. Mm-hmm. What is the requirement on that as far as architectural?
So depending on the number of rooms that you have, you're going to need to have a certain portion that are accessible to people with mobility issues. So a portion of them are going to have a roll-in shower to where there's either there's no threshold or it's a very low threshold to where a wheelchair user can literally roll the wheelchair into the restroom and shower without having to do any transfer. The other type of mobility room that's required requires a bathtub or a transfer shower. So these are two different types of mobility rooms that are going to be required in each hotel. But most people, when they think accessible room, they think of just the roll-in shower, but you have to have both. And then the third is communication features. So those include a doorbell on the outside of the room, so that if someone, either housekeeping or another guest or anyone that visits, pushes that doorbell, it gives an audio signal and a visual. So it's usually a strobe. In addition to that, you have electrical outlets that have to be close to the telephone so that you can use a hearing aid. And so those are usually pretty easy modifications to make if you own a hotel to provide those communication features. Yeah, those are the three types.
So on a website, would you think that those would then need to be identified, or should they just use the blanket? I mean, what if it's like a really small, motel, some of them that, only have maybe 20 rooms. Are they still required to have each type of one of those rooms? And so using a blanket, again, is just assuming that they have each one of those rooms. So every hotel must have those different features?
Yeah, it all depends on the total number of rooms that you have. But yeah, on your website, you're going to want to identify what kind of room it is. Because if you just say it's an ADA room, well, does that mean that's a room for someone with a hearing disability? Is that a room for someone that's in a wheelchair and prefers to transfer onto an accessible bathtub? Or do you need the roll-in shower? Those are important features that when you're shopping for a hotel room, you want to know what you're going to be purchasing.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of lawsuits, Glen will tell you right now, with hotels and that, and it's not just about how the website functions, but they're also looking at, does that facility really have those those items there? So
Yep.
they can get you both ways, Glenn. They can sue you for the lawsuit because, one, it's not correct on your website, and it doesn't function for them. And then they can find out that the hotel doesn't actually have those features, and it's a double whammy.
Yeah.
So
another feature that hotels want to be aware of is the pool lifts. So if you have a spa or a pool, you're going to need an accessible entry. In most cases, a pool lift is the most common. You can do transfer systems and sloped entry, but the most often is most common accessible entry is the pool lift. If you don't have that, that's going to be, an issue. You have some exposure to litigation. And if you have one, but it's always covered, or it doesn't have the power source that's always provided during the pool's open hours, those are common issues that come up in legal claims.
Have they renamed that the Brooks lift?
Teresa Brooks.
Is there like a math equation for these rooms, so as far as the roll-in shower versus lift-in shower and stuff like that, that a hotel needs to kind of follow?
Yeah, there's so if you go on, if you look at the latest edition of the California Building Code, it looks a bit different than the ADA, but there is some overlap. It's not a straight percentage of the overall rooms. It's kind of bracketed in a table. So if you have between 1 and 4 rooms, that's going to determine how many accessible rooms you need. If you have 5 to 20, that'll be different. So, and each bracket is a little bit different.
And I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it just because it was asked. Does my CAASP inspection cover my website?
No. So the CAASP certificate is a California only certificate. So it doesn't cover, federal law. And it's specific to architectural design. So, yeah, unfortunately, there's no. I don't think there's any certification that you can get for the websites. And if there is, it's Congress that has to hash that out. So, don't hold breath.
And we know how intelligent they are technically and electronically. So I wouldn't foresee that coming in the near future.
So you think that there's going to be no certificate or any sort of program that'll be put in place, Glenn, to be able to hire someone like a CAASP, but for websites? You don't see that as something coming down? I get this question a lot, so I know what your answer is, but coming from you, maybe it would be better sometimes than maybe coming from me, because they don't want to believe me.
I know common sense a lot of times people hate, but let's back into this. When did CAASP certificate come into effect in California? When did they develop the program? 2008.
Yeah.
So that was 18 years after the ADA started and they started having lawsuits, right? UNRU's been in effect for 3 years. So if we get half of that for websites, that means maybe 6 years from now. I mean, there were physical lawsuits here for 18 years before they developed the CAASP. It was probably 15 years before they started talking about it. So it's not something that's ever moved fast. I think we're a ways off.
And it's kind of a changing feature. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, their websites are always evolving and always changing. We don't see architectural stuff like that until somebody does a tenant improvement or something like that. So it's not like structure pretty much stays put. So I guess it's a whole lot easier to certify something.
Not to disagree with you, but a lot of times when you see or hear from people in the web about things have to change, you have to do this, you have to do that. Those are the ways that people that do what I do make money off of people. The reality is things don't have to change as often. I mean, if you're a restaurant, yeah, you're going to want your specials up there. You're going to want events up there and things like that. But the bones, 90% of your website doesn't change a lot from week to week, month to month, year to year. And with the way at least California wrote in the UNRU, I think we were version 2.1 when they published the law of WCAG rules. And that's Website Content Accessibility Guidelines by the company that puts this out for the world, not just the US. And it said, or subsequent versions. A lot of the updates between 2.0 2.1 and 2.2 have been for these things that people weren't really prepared for. So we haven't really had any changes on the website as far as what it needs to be accessible for about 5 years now. It's just different mobile applications. When people do things on cell phones, they need to understand how to make them accessible. I really don't think it would be that big of a problem. It's just getting a group of people in Sacramento to understand it enough to create a CAASP thing, and then from them to be able to explain it to the rest of the people in Congress for them to be able to vote on it. And that's the hard thing. You can look at a table, you can look at a bathroom, you can look at a countertop, and they can visualize this. It's a little bit harder to visualize code and things on the back of a website for someone to understand and speak intelligently and create something around it. So should it happen? Yes. I just look at how long it takes for things like this to happen, whether it be at the federal or the state level, and I don't foresee it happening in the near future.
Right. Yeah, there's so many hot topics coming out there. Real quick, Cory, I just wanted to ask you a question in regards to a CAASP. I know that there's a lot of fear out there that, you know, if I put that certificate up, am I really just opening myself up if everything's not done? If I get that inspection, am I really just exposing myself to more? And you know, I'll pose that to you as well, Glenn, like about the exposure of things. So Cory, first, what is that, you know, that fear that people have?
Well, you know, a CAASP, unless they work for a jurisdiction, doesn't have any enforcement authority. So we're really just here to advise you and educate you about your existing condition. And based on the report that you receive, you know, that's your legal exposure. And when you get that report, that's your foundation for making a bear removal plan and reducing your exposure to a lawsuit, and making your facility more accessible. So I would compare it to something like getting your home inspected when you're a prospective buyer. You know, that inspector is going to look at the entire home and evaluate all the elements that are in there and give you, itemized list about, what should be done and what the life expectancy is for each element. And then the owner takes it upon themselves to use that information to either do something about it before something breaks down, or they can plan for whatever financial costs are involved with removing that. So a CAASP inspector is really just educating someone about their property, and having knowledge about what their risks are is more powerful than just sweeping it under the rug and waiting for someone to come in and tell you that there's something that's out of compliance and file a lawsuit. Because like Glenn said, the ADA has been around since 1990, so it's been 31 years. That whole "I didn't know I was doing anything wrong" argument, I don't think is really a valid.
Not going to hold up in court.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Glenn, same thing for you with websites. I mean, people get afraid if I don't put something on there, then I'm really setting myself up for it. If I don't put something on there that says I'm accessible, they get afraid, and in some ways I see them do the opposite. Like they'll want to put something on so someone leaves them alone. But what's your thoughts on that?
Well, you have to have an accessibility statement by law. So that needs to be on there. But other than that, I think the people that are going after websites and the serial litigants that are going after your restaurant, your hotel, your place of business, they know what to look for. So I think having that CAASP inspection up there, and they know I can only get $1,000 per incident out of you versus $4,000, might make them bypass and go on. I think just by having a website that, I mean, I've shown you before, we can jump on a call here. It takes me all of 5 seconds to know if a website's accessible or not accessible. So putting something down at the footer that says, hey, we follow WCAG compliance, which for some people that want it, we put that on there. For your serial litigants, they're never going to get to the bottom of the page, because all I need to do is log onto your website, hit a tool in my taskbar, hit the tab key twice, and I know, yes, you're accessible, or no, you're not. At least enough to get rid of the serial litigant, I guess. Now, if somebody really wants to dig into it, and the bigger the business you are, like Domino's, the further they will dig, then yes, that's something like that. You really need to make sure every I is dotted and T is crossed and all those things. But I think for the average person that's going to be suing you, no. Now, as we talked about before, having that CAASP inspection up there or that WCAG at the bottom for people with disabilities, if you're doing it right, maybe as a placard showing them that you are advocating for them. And I think that would be the benefit of bringing them into your business. But as far as stop avoiding lawsuits, I don't see it.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And I also want to clarify that the CAASP certificate and report, those are voluntary and they're confidential. So a CAASP is not going to submit that report to any local jurisdiction or any government agency. That report is really between you, the CAASP, and the client. You can still, get inspected and have the legal benefits that come with it, and not display the certificate. It's really up to the client if they want to do that or not. But I recommend it just because it's a deterrent. If someone is in the area, a serial plaintiff is in the area, and they're going up and down the street, I think they view that certificate as resistance.
Sorry, there's a truck.
and if you're out looking for a fast settlement, any resistance is not something that you really want to be dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually a lot more protections just having the two of you, one, look at the website, and Cory, you look at the building, and now they can identify what their risk is and what they want to do about it. So there's no harm, no foul with hiring a CAASP, but only long-term benefits, so that you know how to spend your monies and things like that. So that's certainly what I teach and preach out on the world of accessibility. So I will continue to carry on that message for you guys.
Well, and I think you both would agree, it's always a lot more palatable for a business owner to know what they should do and then get that letter in the mail than when they didn't know that they were doing something wrong and all of a sudden this comes. That's when we deal with a lot of people that are frustrated, because if they don't know they're doing something wrong and now they're paying for something they didn't know, that's a little bit harder pill to swallow.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Cory, thank you so much for all of the information, and you are a wealth of knowledge for accessibility codes. I lean on you on a daily basis in what we do, and I just really appreciate everything that you do and all of the great ways that you go out there and try to improve accessibility for the disabled. It's really an honor to work with you as well.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys having me on today.
All right. Well, yeah, thanks for coming on, Cory. For everyone that's watching this, we're going to kind of do this as a series to get started, breaking down different disabilities one at a time, just so people understand these a little bit more. We tackled mobility this week. Next week, we're going to go into kind of what we talked about, and maybe just go into visual issues and kind of go through these one at a time so that everyone understands not the positives and potential negatives of making sure that you can accommodate everyone into your business. So thank you both for a great episode today. We'll talk to everyone here. We'll see everyone else back next week.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thanks.